Hey Nicole, thanks for joining today. I wanted to I really appreciate you taking the time to tell us a little bit more about Campaign HQ, how you guys use data and data analytics to deliver the best quality solutions for your customers. So I know Campaign HQ as the preeminent voter contact firm for politics and advocacy. Is that a fair description, or how would you characterize Campaign HQ and the work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here today, Dante. I really appreciate it, and thanks for calling us preeminent. I consider that a high compliment. Campaign HQ, we help candidates win their elections, and public policy organizations win their public policy battles using live calls, automated calls, text messages, telephone town halls, and all of that centers around contacting the right people with the right message at the right time so that it drives and propels and motivates them to take the actions that we hope they would take, actions that are aligned with their motivations, actions that are aligned with what they believe is in the best interest of their locality, state, country. And that means things like prompting people to return their ballots early, prompting people who may be low to mid propensity voters to get out and vote in an off year election, in a primary, in a special election. And on the public policy side, it's grassroots mobilization to pressure those politicians we elected to do the right thing and keep the promises that we elected them to fulfill. And that often takes the form of patch through calls where a constituent is on the line with the legislator, with a lawmaker staff, demanding that they vote for or against a bill. Or it's having a telephone town hall where we share information about that issue and get people to press one if they support it, and then provide that to legislators, lawmakers who are on the fence. And they say, well, I'm not hearing enough about this issue, or I don't think the people in my district care about this issue. Well, then the people from the organization can march in the next day and say, I was on the line with 6,000 people last night, and 4,000 of them want you to do X. That's really powerful. The one thing that we know is politicians fear nothing more than losing their next election, and seeing substantial constituent support on an issue is extremely motivating to them. And Dante, all of that relies on data. You have to be calling the right people. You have to know useful information about those people in order to deliver that message in a way that persuades them. You think about a phone call. The phone rings, someone is in, they're watching Wheel of Fortune, they're in the middle of making spaghetti, they're doing something else. They're not thinking about public policy or about the next election the same way that we are. I wake up every morning and I'm thinking about what's going to happen in November 2024. I know you are, and probably the people watching this are, but the rest of America is not. And so, how do we capture their interest? That means understanding something about them and what's going to motivate them before you place that call or have that voter contact.
It's so funny you bring that up because I have to remind our customers frequently that this is our whole life.
Yeah.
When I say this, I mean politics at large.
Mm-hmm.
Politics, advocacy issues. This is our whole life, but this is only one portion of whether it's a donor, a voter, or just your average citizen. Politics is only one part, if at all, part of their life. And so I appreciate you giving us a kind of a rundown of of what you do. And so I saw a piece that your company Campaign HQ had published a while back, actually just about a week ago. Great kind of high level overview on how campaigns and advocacy organizations can use data. Just running through it here, but I'm hoping that you can maybe dig a little bit deeper into sort of data best practices, how to use data and to make the messaging more effective, make the campaigns more efficient, and more, I guess, impactful in achieving the intended result.
You bet. So, the first thing that I would encourage people to think about with data is that it doesn't have to be complicated, but you do have to keep the data in one place. You can't effectively utilize and leverage the information that you're collecting and gathering if you're trying to, if you have 8 different spreadsheets to do something like that. And so on the fundraising side, obviously Prospector Pro is a great way to do that. On the voter contact side, there are a number of platforms, all of which, a data platform in many ways is what you make of it. So
Sure.
it's about choosing a place, putting everything in one place, and then making sure that you utilize it effectively. And from a high level, on an election standpoint, you're trying to put the people in your area, in your district, into 3 buckets. They either support you, you don't know, or they oppose you. And as you might find that information out at the doors. You can find it out on a phone call. You can find it out when you're out and about at an event and people come and talk to you. There are so many ways to get that input, and it's important that that input comes in and is funneled into that one location, because once you know who supports you, as an example, you could do a few things with that. The number one thing is, once someone supports you, you should be driving them to vote early, and if not early, on election day. The RNC is starting this new nationwide bank your vote program, which I think is absolutely the right direction and long needed. And I love the focus on why early voting matters. You know, when even if someone is a mid to high propensity voter, which means they're very likely to vote, their voting history indicates that probably if they vote, they're going to vote for you. But even so, if they have not voted during an extended early voting period, by mail, in person, we are we are required, at the risk of political malpractice, to continue messaging them, to keep sending them mail, to keep calling them, to keep feeding them digital ads, OTT, etc. And so every day that voter doesn't vote, we are spending money on them and not on someone else who might be a low propensity voter for whom 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 pushes are needed to get them to the polls, or someone who's on the line and needs to know more about who you are and where you stand. So all the time that we spend pushing our election day voters to vote is time and money that we aren't ever going to get back, to go after the folks that might be a little bit harder to reach or harder to pull our way. So the first thing is the 3 buckets. You either are for us, we don't know about you, or you're against us. The second thing on data is, and I call this the basic blocking and tackling of politics, is knowing who's already voted. Whether they're for you, you're not sure, or they're against you. If they've already voted, the one thing I know is it's not about spending 1 penny more or 1 penny less on a text message. Any amount you spend on that voter above zero is a waste.
Waste.
And so, making sure that you have the ability to weed those people out in real time. You should be able to get who's voted and use that to suppress and remove from your list of active contacts. From there, I look at maybe that next level of sophistication, which is, for the people for whom I don't know where they stand, can I look at the folks who are my supporters and find commonalities? Do they live in a certain county? Do they live in a certain part of the district? Am I able to identify them on certain issues where there's a wedge between me and my opponent? There are certain issues that are more vote determinative, that change people's votes more than others. They call them a wedge issue for a reason. You think about that visual of a block of wood and Abraham Lincoln splitting that rail. A wedge issue has the ability to split that rail and get your people soundly on your side. Things like life, Second Amendment. Oftentimes, those can be real wedge issues in a primary. They also can be motivational and in general, if you are significantly different than your opponent. And so you can potentially look at your supporters and find some areas of commonality. And you don't have to be a PhD in data science to do that. You know,
Thankfully.
yes, exactly, exactly. And there are, some of the systems out there provide, some of the data systems out there provide some of that for you, but you certainly can look at your supporters and find people who look like them and then aggressively focus on and turn those people out.
I like the fact that you kind of laid out two different use of data strategies. There's the proactive, which is done sort of prior to you launching a campaign. And when I say campaign, I mean like a message, it might be a phone campaign, it might be a text message campaign, it might be an ad or a digital ad. there's the data that you collect on the front end, and then there's the learning part of it, which is the
Yeah.
reactive portion. So what are you getting back from these conversations, and how can you use that to further refine the message,
Yeah.
or to learn more about the electorate in such a way that you can do a better job at messaging going forward. I think that I think that, there's almost too much of an emphasis on the front end. It's like, trying to get things perfect, get in terms of like what's the right message with the, I guess you could call it static data, and not enough emphasis on what can we learn through this process of messaging and taking back that feedback to refine the message going forward. It's the electorates are, I mean, it's necessarily a fluid, we're talking about many, either hundreds of thousands or, sometimes millions of voters. And, to suggest that this is kind of like a, a static set of individuals with their, motivations, priorities, expectations, would be, that mischaracterizes how groups of people sociologically act, right? That they are reacting to things that are happening in the news. They are reacting to things that are happening in their own lives. So being able to, both use data on the front end to target, to create message, but also being able to collect data throughout the process to learn and refine the message, I think is critically important as well.
Yeah. Oh, completely agree. And I will say that is one of the most common things that we see when we're working with a campaign is they're not sure how to do that.
Mhm.
And so, as an example, they're receiving multiple inputs. And the way I talk about it is, when you're going to the door, and if you're a state rep candidate, you can knock on enough doors to win the election, which means you can have enough conversations. You, maybe your team, your spouse, your kids, you could personally talk to enough people to make a vote determinative difference. And, so oftentimes those candidates have the absolute best instinctive sense. They can put their finger up in the wind, and as things develop, kind of like you said, there's events in the news that drive the narrative of a campaign that are beyond your control. Maybe something's happening, you're running for Congress and something's happening in Congress. Well, you're not there, you don't have a vote, you don't control that, but you certainly have to get in and participate and react and engage with that information, because that's where voters are, and you have to meet the voter where they are and what they care about. And that does change, it is dynamic over the course of time. But that said, we often find that candidates, or even their campaign managers, their general consultants, they are putting out so many other fires. You're dealing with your opponent attacking you. You're dealing with the media. You're trying to approve digital ads, direct mail, all of those kinds of things. And so the notion of taking the results from a text message, or the results from, all those people that you met at an event, and trying to get that back into your voter database, it often gets pushed to the wayside. People know it's important. I've never talked to someone who doesn't think it's important.
Right.
That being said, I can't tell you how many times we return a file to a client of ours, and we tell them, Agnes is deceased, and Gertrude has moved away. And the next round of voter contact, Agnes and Mildred are still in the list. And so we really started taking a lot more proactive approach with this. And so if you send me back that data and you tell me it's clean, I'm going to know it's not, because we're doing that for you. And so we, like I said, we take a more proactive approach, where if we know something, modeling is a guess, direct voter contact is knowing. Someone
Right.
told you that they're for you, they're against you, etc. If someone tells us, I don't like so and so, go tell them to pound sand, I don't want to keep trying to turn that person out to the polls. It's the last thing I want to do. So we try to narrow that funnel. I always tell people, I would rather call 5,000 people 3 times than 15,000 people once, because ultimately,
Hmm.
there have been studies done over the, I've been doing this since 1996, but over the years there's been a whole host of different studies done, and things change over time. But one thing doesn't change is you need at least 4 to 7 touches on a low propensity voter or an undecided voter to shift them. Think about it from a commercial standpoint. How many times do you need to see a Lay's potato chip ad before you know Lay's potato chip has a new flavor out there? It's more than once. And it needs
Right.
to come from different areas. It needs to be a surround sound echo chamber. And that means phones and mail and texts. One of the dangers that I see lurking on the horizon is people have begun to rely more and more on texts because they're so fast, they're so
Mhm.
easy to deliver, they're relatively inexpensive, they're an amazing form of voter communication. But every time you send out a text message, especially if you send out something spammy, you're going to get opt outs. And if
Right.
once a person opts out of your text messaging, they've opted out forever out of your
Forever.
text
Right.
messaging. And over time, that might mean, 10, 20% of your desired universe is unreachable by text message. So I am urging people, A, be careful what you send. B, have a plan to do with what you're going to do with those opt-outs later. We'd worked on an IE in Nevada. They were in support of Lombardo for governor, who, as you know, Governor Lombardo was one of our few amazing bright spot wins in 2022. One when even the US Senate candidate there unfortunately fell short. We did work for an independent expenditure group there, and we were specifically solely focused on calling the opt-outs because
Okay.
in a close race, let's say you're running for state rep, you've got a universe of 5,000 people you're trying to either persuade or turn out. 1,000 of them have opted out of your communications, and this race is going to be decided by less than 1%. Do you think you should call those opt outs? Get something on their voicemail? Get something they're going to see or hear in real time? I sure think you do. So I think that's the next danger. And it's something that people have not been thinking about and have not been anticipating. But if you don't have your data all in one place, if you can't match your voters and who's voted and who's likely to vote for you and who's opted out, if you don't have that in one place where you can pull that list, you're going to be in real trouble. And there's going to be people who lose over that.
Well, I'm glad that you explained that because as you were talking, I was thinking about how do you deal with those opt outs. So that's helpful. I'm glad that you explained that. One thing that taking a little bit of a left turn here, but the news outlet polling organization, or I guess it's not a polling organization so much as a news outlet, 538. They have a podcast. I forget what it's called, but they do this thing: good use of data, or good use of polling, bad use of polling. Um, and they'll analyze, different things that come out with polls and whether or not they think it's a productive data point. When it comes to messaging and when it comes to persuasion or turnout, recognizing that fundraising, turnout, and persuasion messaging are all very different. Do you have any learnings or any advice about like sort of good use of data versus bad use of data in crafting your messages
Mhm.
for the various campaigns?
Trying to think where to start on, because there's so many places to dive in on that, right? One of the things I see is people trying to get too specific, if you will.
Sure,
You know,
I
the
agree.
average voter, like you said earlier, politics, voting is a one-day thing for them. Politics is a part of their lives, but it's not their whole lives. And so people, sometimes people who, you get a candidate, a campaign manager, a GC who's really into their data, and sometimes they can take it what I think is a step too far and get so far into the weeds that they've lost the voters' interest. So
I
that's
couldn't
one
agree
thing
more.
that I tend to see. Other minefields. Again, when you're looking at model data, that's a guess. It's not a fundamental truth. Being at someone's door and having them tell you, yes, secure borders is my number one issue. That's a fact. You stood and looked at that person, had a conversation, they told you that. So, I think you can use that a little bit more securely than modeled data, because modeled data is mostly right. It's a good guess, but it can be wrong.
I think there is a fundamental, and this has been true for my the vast majority of my career in the campaign side, is the misunderstanding about what a model is. And the models are not tags. Models are not positive IDs one way or another. So in that helps you to distinguish what a turnout message versus a persuasion message, because those are different, right?
Yeah.
You probably don't need to lean as heavy on individual issues for persuasion purposes. I mean, for turnout purposes. You just
Yes.
need them to know how to vote, because you have a pretty good idea that they're going to vote, and we have a pretty good idea as to whether or not they're going to vote the way that we would like to see. So it's just a matter of giving them the information in many cases, and further encouragement. Whereas persuasion, now you start to get into the issues. Now you start to get into the distinguish yourself from the competition. And I think that there's a fundamental difference that needs to be appreciated. And not every you probably don't need to. It might actually work to your detriment to use persuasion messaging on turnout, because what if you hit the wrong issue and you lead them astray, and that someone who's going to vote for you is now having second thoughts, and now they're doing more research, and you may dismotivate them. I don't know if that's a word. Demotivate. What's the right way
Yes.
to say it?
Yes.
Disincentivize voting. But
Yes.
do you find that there are general best practices for persuasion versus turnout messaging?
Yeah, absolutely. So turnout messaging is probably in the last 4 to 6 years seen the most change. In part, this really took an increase in 2020 because of COVID and the changes to voting. You remember, we had states that canceled and rescheduled their primaries. We had states that mailed ballots to everyone in the district that had never done something like that before. But what we did see was a massive shift to early voting. And so, as a result, we saw massive voter confusion. People who thought they knew where to vote that didn't know where to vote. People who thought they know, I always go to the schoolhouse. They show up at the schoolhouse and it's locked and padlocked shut. And, we've seen changes in the duration of early in person voting. Who's allowed to request a ballot by mail? How can you safely and securely return it? So, successful candidates are spending more time getting into that plan to vote with the voter. If you look at the academic studies, you know what is you know what is one of the most effective forms of appreciably changing turnout. Not just turning out people who were going to turn out already, actually boosting your turnout mid amongst low propensity voters, people with a poor voting track record. It's the plan to vote, which means walking people through in their minds how they plan to vote. Do you plan to vote early in person, by mail, or on election day? Great. You plan to vote early in person. Do you know which day you're going to go? Which of the early voting polling places do you plan to be at? Are you going to walk there, drive? Are you going to go with someone else? It's been proven that the kinds of questions that allow a voter to paint a very vivid picture in their mind of voting make a difference. And the reason is, people have a natural aversion to behaving in a way that's incongruent with what they've already envisioned themselves. So now they see themselves as a voter. Well, if you're a voter, what do, Dante? You vote. And so the more clearly you can walk them through that path to vote, the better. Also, you can follow up with people on that plan to vote if you're able to record it in enough detail. I always tell people this is an 80-20 problem with an 80-20 solution, right? You don't have to capture every last detail of their plan to vote. If you can get a few of the high level basics, when you do call that person back, you can reference those high level basics. Hey, I remember you're going to go vote you're going to go vote early in person. You thought you were going to go sometime this week and you were planning on driving there. How's that going for you? There's ways that you can then reinforce the message that the voter gave to you with a really good data driven strategy. So that's turnout. Turnout is focused on the mechanics, the how, the when, the where, the why, and understanding that there is a great deal of confusion. And also amongst Republicans, there's a great deal of worry and concern about accuracy, voting security, voting integrity, vote counting. And we need to make sure that voters are able to address that in a way that does not deter them from actually casting their vote. We want them to go and vote in the way that they are most confident that their vote's going to get counted, and that they do it correctly, because it can be hard in some places to know, can I take my mail ballot and show up at the polling place on election day and return it? Or will that cause me to cast a provisional ballot that I have a greater uncertainty of being counted later on in the canvass, right? So that's turnout. Then you've got persuasion. Again, persuasion is where modeling can be helpful, because you're going to have a good guess, a good idea of what might be useful. And so then again, you're looking at what are the things that people in this district care about? What are some of the wedge issues that make me different from my opponent? And again, sometimes that's not an issue. Sometimes that can be things like, I'm really young and I represent the future. I live in Grundy County and my opponent lives in Hardin County. There can be things that are, we tend to be, as political professionals, we are ideologically motivated and we're motivated by the game of politics. But people who, you know, people for whom voting is a once every 2 years or once every so often thing, they want their hometown guy or gal, or they want someone who represents the future. I see that a lot in, surprisingly, I see that a lot in rural areas, because in rural areas, one of people's key drivers is this loss aversion, that great people, these kids graduate from high school, they go to college, and then they go to the city and they never come back. And my town is getting emptied out and decimated. And I don't want to live a life where I have to get on a plane to see my kids. That isn't necessarily, what we would consider a typical ideological issue. But boy, you talk about something that motivates people, and then they see a person in their mid 20s or late 20s or early 30s running. That is, that's something that is
Inspiring.
a shining beacon of hope. I saw that in Southwest Iowa, where Devin Wood, who's in her early 20s, just astoundingly won in just such a commanding way, because she's a hometown kid who loves her area, loves rural Iowa, and wants to make it great again. To use the saying, and people will flock to that kind of thing. So she persuaded and turned out people who probably wouldn't have gone out to the polls, because what she had to offer was such a contrast and so inspirational.
That's a great tie-in to some of the advice that we give our users on the fundraising side, is that oftentimes you don't have to know exactly what issue is most motivating to them, or what types of ideologically aligned candidates that they like to give to, but sometimes people give just because they like you, and because you've put yourself out there authentically. So I wanted to touch upon, obviously, text, and we still do telemarketing, or still telemarketing still exists on the fundraising side. How do you distinguish a sort of a fundraising message? Because now we still want to motivate people to take action, but this is a different activity, and it's more of an immediate thing. You talked earlier about making a plan to vote, or in other cases, contacting a legislator to voice your opinion. We want to motivate people to take action, but have you found that there's a fundamental difference in the messaging around, when we send someone a text message to motivate them to contribute? Are there general best practices around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was a fundraiser for over 20 years, and so this issue is close to my heart. And fundamentally, the difference between fundraising and voter contact is, if someone's going to give you money, they're likely already for you. So think about,
Sure.
presume that they're already a supporter, and then figure out what's going to motivate them to give. Things that motivate a donor or a prospective donor to give are the notion of what may happen to the state, the country. If I lose, what will happen? And I don't think you have to work very hard to paint a grim picture of our country and our principles and the things that we hold dear in grave danger. So if we lose, what's the danger? What will happen? Well, I need your help now to prevent that. And here are the things that I'm going to do with your contribution. So the fundraising, kind of the fundraising journey in people's minds is, you know, here's the state that I want our, our country to be in. Here is the threat to it. Here's what will happen if I don't take action. And here's what's going to be done with my contribution in order to avert that danger and crisis.
I think that's so important. The what's going to be done with the contribution,
Mm-hmm.
because
Yes.
when you bring money into the picture, however small it may be, if it's a $1, $5, $25, $50 contribution, they still are expecting to reap some type of return on their investment. And when you start getting into the high dollar donor space, it's even more magnified.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is one area where we collectively could do a better job, is articulating, how are these funds going to be used? How are you going to see a benefit? And so I really appreciate that point.
Yeah, and I've seen, and you mentioned, low dollar donors, high dollar donors. The reality is, for the person giving $10, that $10 is as meaningful as $10,000 is for the person giving $10,000.
That's
So,
right.
I think fundamentally, the America that they want to see, may or may not be different. They may have different things that they want to see in their ideal future state.
Right.
But the but the notion of I want a return on investment, I believe is there no matter what. And some of the things I think about are, people love to help you, make sure that you have, I need to recruit a county chair in every county in my district. I need to get precinct chairs. I need to hold this rally. I need to get out the vote mailers. I think that it's important to be specific enough to allow the potential donor to grasp on quickly to what you want to do with the money, but not to get too far in the weeds, right? If I say, well, I want to send a mailer to low to mid propensity voters who have, in this, I think that you can get so far that you get away from what the motivation is, which is, if I lose, we're in danger, and here's how I'm going to win. Because people want to give to winners. Yes, we're all in this together. We're ideologically aligned. This is part of a larger movement, but people don't want to give to losers.
Right. They need to see that pathway to victory. I noticed you conspicuously didn't include "I need to buy yard signs" as one of those of those things that the campaign could use the funds on. But no, we don't want to go down that rabbit
Yeah,
hole right now.
let's not go there. Yard signs
Uh,
don't win elections.
love it. So I really appreciate all of your insights, and you taking the time to chat with us today. I just wanted to ask, what's new, what's exciting, what are you excited about, and anything that you're looking forward to for Campaign HQ or for this upcoming election cycle?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I am the most excited about is campaigns seem to be interested and motivated to try new things. And so the things that we know as best practices today that are given are because someone wanted to try them at some point and found out what
Right.
worked. And so that excites me generally. Something that I'm particularly intrigued by right now is the notion of how we leverage influencers in direct voter contact.
Mm.
And by influencers, I don't mean someone who's got 500,000 Instagram followers. What I mean is, you know, Ed Jones, who's the football coach at the high school. That's a
Hmm.
well-known person in that area. And so as an example, how can I use Ed Jones in my text messaging to get a result? How can I, you know, how can I ask people once they agree that they're going to vote, can you help me with the name? Can you help me tell three other people to go out and vote for me? Collecting the names of those three people and then following up with that voter and say, did you talk to John, Mary, and Joe? So I'm really interested in how we use direct voter contact to leverage the power of relationships. Because you think about it, you know, when I want to know if a restaurant is good, I might ask you. And if you tell me a restaurant isn't good, I'm going to believe you and I probably won't go there. So the power of you talking to your friend about voting has to be more impactful than yet another direct mail piece in your mailbox. And
Right.
so I believe we can use our current tactics to leverage that by asking people who, once we persuade you, especially a mid to low propensity voter, let's say, for folks on the phone who are on the line here who are wondering what I mean by that, what I mean is someone who votes in general elections but not primaries, or someone who votes in presidential years but not in midterm years, and certainly doesn't vote in municipal elections in an odd number
Right.
year. If someone like that commits to voting for me, the likelihood is the people in their circle also likely have similar voting patterns. And so your ability to leverage that person to get to more people like them, I think could have I think that can have an impact that we do not know how great it can be. So I'm very interested in things like that right now.
Yeah, we're talking about network effects and social proof,
Yeah,
and we now have plenty of data to support the how powerful these tactics are in motivating political behavior. So
right.
I agree. I think I'm also excited about things like relational organizing. There are some great companies that are building software around using relational organizing, which is a tool that facilitates the types of interactions that you're describing. But I
Right.
think that that's the next. And I also appreciate how you distinguish the influencer from, we're talking about micro influencers here,
Yes.
not like celebrities or Instagram celebrities,
Yeah.
um,
And
but
using that at scale, that's where I think we need to take the leap. That I think that this happens, or at least on our side of the aisle, it happens organically now, and we do some things sporadically, but it is not consistently done aggressively at scale, and that's where I think we have an opportunity.
I agree. I agree, and I'm looking forward to seeing how these tactics are executed and implemented in various campaigns across the country. So, Nicole, this it's always fun. It's always a great time talking politics, talking business
Yes.
with you. I really appreciate you taking the time, and looking forward to seeing what you guys do in 2024.
Sounds good. Thanks so much. This was fun. For anyone who has any questions or wants to talk more, our website is www.chq.us. That's chq.us. So would love to talk to anyone about their voter contact plans and how we can help make them effective. I don't, we're not going to twist your arm. We're not going to give you a hard sales pitch, but if there's a way we can move the needle for you, that's what we're here for, and that's what we do.
Appreciate it. Awesome.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Be well.